All right, thank you, David, and happy Pride, everyone. I'm very thrilled to be kicking off this symposium today. So before we delve too deeply into the finer details of travel policy and supplier relations, we wanted first to give you the chance to hear directly from the voice of LGBTQ travelers, of which I'm one myself. In this first panel, we'll hear the firsthand experiences of 5 LGBTQ plus business travelers, some of the challenges they face, and how their own corporate travel programs have or haven't helped. I am pleased to welcome Emma Cusden. She is the director of Global Butterflies, an organization established to highlight awareness of trans and non-binary issues to the business world. We also have Austin Ayers and Christina Martinez. There are 2 married road warriors who are going to be sharing their own experiences, both in domestic and international travel. I have Emily Kopp. She's the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Dean. And last but not least, we have Grant Kaplan, who is the President of Procuragents. So before we get started, I wanted to emphasize that we want today to have a space to feel comfortable asking whatever questions come to mind. Everyone's going to have a short presentation, and there's going to be time for Q&A after that. Don't worry about asking the wrong question. Don't worry about using the wrong terminology if it's not perfect. We're all on a constant path of learning, and we understand everyone's on a different stage of that journey. That's why our panelists are sharing their experiences today. And I also wanted to provide a few quick visual examples of the world faced by LGBTQ plus travelers today before we get started, courtesy of Equidex. This is one of several resources we're going to be sharing with you throughout the symposium. So if we could advance to the next slide. All right, I'm not sure how to move the slides. Oh, here we go. All right, so this first map, what you're seeing here, this is on a country-by-country basis. Everywhere in the world where consensual sexual activity between individuals of the same sex is still illegal, in some cases punishable by death. One positive note I could say about this is that there's a lot more green on this map today than there would have been if we'd been doing these conferences a few years ago. India, of course, was a big move a few years ago to decriminalize homosexuality, as was Angola and Botswana have all changed their laws in recent years. And there's some other places that are potentially could be added to this list soon, Namibia being one of those. So if we could move to the second map. Now this map, this illustrates places in the world that offer LGBTQ plus individuals protection from employment discrimination. You're gonna notice there's a lot less green here, including the United States. So if we break that down, we go to the next slide, to just the United States, you can see that as of now, there are a lot more states that don't offer any protections than those that do, and even fewer that offer protection specific to gender identity. So that's just a little bit about the world that we're in today, and it's one of the challenges that LGBTQ plus travelers must navigate. I could sit and show more maps and data all day long, but as you're about to find out, everyone has their own story as to what this means to them as travelers. So for the first of those stories, I turn the stage over to Emma. Emma, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Michael, and really delighted to be here, and welcome from London. So it's a little bit later in the day here than it is for many of you, but super delighted to hear. My name's Emma Cusden. I'm a director of Global Butterflies, and as Michael said, we are a trans and non-binary inclusion consultancy for workplaces. That's all we do, and we help many organizations become more inclusive. I'm equally, I've got 2 other things on my day job. So one is my day job is I'm a people director for Standard & Poor's Global. So I've stepped out of my day job to join you today, which is great. And equally, I'm a trustee of an LGBTQ plus charity called the Human Dignity Trust, which looks at laws around the world to challenge some jurisdictions so that they can be more LGBTQ plus inclusive. So super delighted to be here. And just want to echo everybody's introduction. I'm really looking forward to being business traveling again. It's been far too long. I can't wait to get back on and meet some of my colleagues around the world and start to business travel rather than meeting everybody as a box and a little square. So let me just share with you some personal experiences. As a business traveler, being a trans woman, it's quite a stressful experience, business traveling, all the way from going to the airport, and how will I be received through passport control and security? What about the pat down? If I get patted down, how do I feel about that? I'm very lucky that my documents match with some of my appearance, but I know for trans and non-binary travelers, some of their documentation may not match. And so, you know, there's a lot of challenge through the airport and the check-in and security. And then equally thinking about where you're traveling to. Will I be safe? Will I be outed? You know, the jurisdiction am I traveling to, given Michael's lovely maps around the world? Am I traveling to a red place, or am I traveling to one of the 15 jurisdictions around the world that criminalizes me as a trans woman? How will I be accepted? So there's a lot of angst and stress for traveling. All the way through to the taxi driver to pick me up to take me to the airport. Will they misgender me? Will they call me sir? I've been speaking most of today and my voice tends to drop towards the end of the day. So, you know, how will I be, how will I feel that I'm being welcomed? And all of these things come into my mind as I'm business traveling. And so when I'm thinking about business traveling, I'm also talking to my manager around where I'm going and how I will be accepted. And I've got no issue with the organization I work for giving me support, but it's sometimes more those social things when you're business traveling. You know, if I'm going to a bar or a restaurant in a jurisdiction, you know, am I safe? So all those things come into my mind, and I have a little saying as I'm going through the airport. I've also packed my bag, but I've packed my zen as well. I just have to chill out and roll with things, and if I get misgendered, that's fine. You know, it's not the end of the world, and I'm continuing on my journey. Sometimes when I'm handing my documents over and somebody's talking to me, just hearing my voice, they'll call me sir. Even though they've got my name and my picture as the passport, as Emma Cusdin, I get called sir. So, you know, this is all part of the Zen process as I go through airports. And then you get to destination, and hotel check-in sometimes can be equally as challenging where you're misgendered. So, you know, it's all about focusing on the big things rather than the little things. I'm traveling to a great location, I'm meeting my colleagues, and I'm doing my work. But at the back of my head is, am I safe? And there are certain countries, and I've spoken to my line manager, that I will not go to. You know, Dubai for trans people is one of those that criminalizes me, irrespective of my passport. So I will not be going to Dubai. And the trans and non-binary map of the world, as Michael very clearly has said, looks a bit different in some jurisdictions. So absolutely, I will talk to my line manager. I've also had conversations with my line manager more recently about some of the states in the US, as Michael's map has shown. There are a number of states in the US and more recently that are passing or trying to pass anti-trans legislation that bans kids from playing sport, that criminalizes, you know, that stops people getting medical health care, where I have no protections. And that really worries me when I go to one of those states and thinking, actually, you know, how will I be accepted? This is not about the law, but this is about social acceptance as well. So all these things come to my mind in thinking about business travel. And for me, the biggest thing is to have the knowledge about, am I going to be safe? And the maps that David has shown really helps. But equally, it's about having that conversation with your managers and leaders and your travel team around, am I going to be safe? And how can I keep myself in a jurisdiction? And the final thing I probably will say is there is sometimes a difference between, I call it passport privilege. So I have a UK passport. So I hope that my UK government would protect me, but in some jurisdictions I might have that protection. In others, such as Dubai, it might be lesser protection for me. So absolutely. I mean, for example, I love traveling to Malaysia. Malaysia is one of my great destinations that I like to travel with for many great reasons. But ultimately, if I was a local in Malaysia, I would be subject to Sharia law and potentially 30 lashes for just being trans. But I'm very fortunate to have that Western passport. And then final thing, and I will stop. My final thing is to travel buyers who may be listening, thinking, actually, how do I convince my organization to embrace this subject a little bit more? Well, quite simply, generations are changing. Generation Z, that is just coming into the workplace at the moment, is the most inclusive and equally trans and non-binary generation that's about to hit our workplace. Data that we've seen coming out of the US especially says anywhere between 15 to 20% of your workforce in Gen Z could identify as trans and non-binary, and definitely sees gender as a spectrum. So if you want to help and support people coming to the workplaces who will equally want to work for you, but equally will be your customers and clients, then having LGBT inclusion as something that you really think about when you're looking at travel is something that I think is just going to come. So embrace it, engage in it like today, and ask questions. And absolutely, I'm very open for any questions, irrespective of language. So feel free to ask away. But thank you so much for being here. And I'm looking forward to getting on that plane once again.
Thank you so much, Emma. I am as well, and hopefully our discussion here will help and make more Zen experiences for you during travel. So thank you for sharing your experience. As Emma said, we're going to have time for Q&A after all the presentations. So I encourage you to go ahead and submit your questions now. As a reminder, use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature. We're not monitoring the chat feature at the moment, but we will get to as many questions as we can with the Q&A. All right, next up, we have Austin and Christina who are joining us. We have a very Texas-heavy crew today. They're joining us from the greater Houston area, and they're going to share their experiences. So Austin and Christina, I turn it over to you.
All right, I'm going first. My name is Christina Martinez, and I've worked in the oil and gas industry for over 17 years. The majority of my career, I was a business traveler and have been fortunate to be an expat in many countries. Two of my longer assignments were in Algeria and Indonesia. Both countries are not exactly known as being LGBTQ plus friendly. So I was a little surprised that my employer at the time only gave me a one-pager discussing local laws and customs. For my assignment in Algeria, the one-pager had as the first bullet point that homosexuality is illegal. And I was shocked there was no further information. There was nothing else. Imprisonment, for those of you who don't know, imprisonment for homosexuality in Algeria is up to 2 years if convicted. I remember thinking, will the company's lawyer defend me? Is this safe for me? Yes, it could be an amazing opportunity and will look great on the resume. But will saying no to this assignment hurt me, hurt my career? Will I get further future opportunities at my company? For my own peace, I reached out to 10 other females. By the way, 2 of them were out lesbians and that were currently living in Algeria who worked for my company, and they answered a lot of my questions. In my case, I was lucky that I could bypass HR and ask other lesbians who had traveled the site before me. I benefited from their experience and their knowledge, but who helped them when they were preparing to do mobile lives from home? When I was asked by Michael to be part of this panel, I did some initial research, but on LGBTQ plus business travelers, and was not surprised to find that up to 95% of them had chosen not to reveal their sexuality. For my assignment in Indonesia, on the island of West Papua, I learned very quickly to jump back in the closet when I worked at site. At this particular site, I was the only Western female, and the site held over 10,000 workers. To say that I was a minority would be a huge understatement. I was a unicorn. I was unique and one of a kind. To the credit of a few female coworkers back home, They recognized the situation that I would be walking into and discussed my safety with a cis male coworker who's also going to site. He would become my constant companion and help divert any unwanted or harmful attention away from me. My female coworkers in the States that recognized a possible issue, and my male coworker who didn't question why he was being asked to do this, are great examples of what allyship should be. Your turn.
Sounds good. Hello, everyone. My name's Austin Ayers, and I am married to this lovely lady next to me. Only during a global pandemic would we ever get to do such a wonderful symposium jointly. Usually she's on the road business, while her work takes her through more international travel, and I certainly think that's such a great it brings about so many things that already Christina and Emma have touched on, including travel insurance and things we've done when we personally travel. For my career in financial services, I think, 100% of my travel is domestic. They usually pick a region, 7 to 11 states, and right now mine is the Midwest in the United States, so that's Texas up through Minnesota. It is a new territory for me, with Kansas and Missouri being given to me last year, and South Dakota, Nebraska, and North Dakota being given to me this year. So with that just comes a lot of challenges that perhaps it's not the right wording to say, maybe the burden of the research of my safety. And to think, although my company is incredibly inclusive, that research does tend to fall on me. And so some of the things I wanted to touch on today from a domestic travel angle was, has already been touched on a little bit, but 95% of a study that Concor, who is our booking agent, did in 2019 mentioned that 95%, as my wife just mentioned, of LGBTQ travelers choose at some point or another to hide who they are. And if you just take a moment to think what that can do to someone in a world where everyone I recruit or interview is wanting a company that is inclusive, whether they're a part of our community that we're discussing today or not. And so I've really been working hard with my company to offer some resources where perhaps I can quickly know if there's some safety concerns, political unrest, even rallies right when I land at an airport. A lot of that tends to help me as a domestic business traveler. But more so, what I'd probably conclude with is some of the things besides my company offering employee resource groups and diversity inclusion monthly conversations on real specific topics such as microaggressions and terminologies that we can move away from in today's day and age, some that even I used to say, and that become habitual, trying to break those patterns. But things that also make a difference for me are those who are employed in the business traveler community. It's making me feel comfortable when I check into a hotel. Sometimes my wife does have the benefit of traveling with me, and it's nice to maybe if they're checking with me, for example, on are you okay with a room by an elevator and a king bed and no tub, that's more around the bed, the room style. But very often instead, I'm just asked, are you sure you want one king bed? And, it's in the lobby of a hotel, their voice carries, there's that embarrassment. So those are my, less subtle experience as a domestic traveler here in the United States, at least for a white female who can hide her sexual orientation quite well. Does that sadden me to say a little bit? Yes, but I'm pretty excited to represent my company here, who, as a financial services company, tends to lean more conservatively, has been in overdrive trying to change that, not only for retention, but to also start recruiting people who are showing a desire for inclusion and a little bit more longevity with a company these days. So that's more what the angle I can represent as a business traveler.
All right. Thank you so much, Austin and Christina, for sharing your experience. It's been very enlightening, so I really appreciate you sharing that with us today. Next up, we will go to Emily, who also is joining us from Texas. So Emily, let's hear about your experiences.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So yes, my name is Emily and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm a director of strategic partnerships. So for anyone not familiar with DEAM, we've got a global travel management platform for businesses. And I also want to point out that I'm a board member of Equality Texas. And so this is the largest nonprofit dedicated to equitable treatment of LGBTQ people in the state of Texas. So I feel like I've got a very relevant panelist here today. So I think just a quick story I want to share with you today is from my lens as a woman in a same-sex marriage. And Christina and Austin, I hope you get a kick out of this. So my wife and I love to travel, and we both travel quite a bit for companies we've worked for. And whenever we travel together, there is quite a bit of research that goes into where we're going to stay, not just in terms of proximity to offices or convention centers or the quality of hotels, but also what kind of cultural considerations there are, and perhaps what kind of safety precautions we need to consider as a same-sex couple. And I'm reminded of a trip to Shenzhen, China, where we knew, as long as we weren't making any outward expressions of our sexuality, we should be relatively fine. And I feel privileged, even just to say that much. And so despite our research, I think we still can find ourselves in funny and perhaps tricky situations. So after 30 plus hours of travel, we had made it to our hotel and we had booked a king-size suite in advance. But upon checking in, the staff, who saw 2 female travelers, was insistent that they wanted to do us a favor and give us 2 queen-size beds. And it took, consider the language barrier here. It took not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 clerks kind of between, the broken English that they had and our very ignorant, limited amount of Chinese that we knew. That 1 bed is fine. 1, it's okay. And they kept looking at us like, we're doing you a favor, no charge, it's going to be fine. But we were trying to explain without literally explaining that no change was needed. Thank you very much. But, we appreciate it and we're good to go. So while I look back on this story and we get to laugh, we both traveled internationally and domestically, and we have been harassed and we have been made to feel unsafe because of our relationship. So that's why, I'm really pleased that we're having this panel today. And I'm also really hopeful about the progress that the company I work for, DEAM, is making, with tools and technologies that can help lift some of this burden on LGBTQ travelers. And so through a partnership with a platform that is called GeoShore, we're combining big data, AI, and crowdsourced reporting to provide an assessment of LGBTQ traveler safety on a hyper-local level. And so, in its most literal sense, it provides safety scores based on the locale that you're traveling to. And I think that's a good step towards kind of what we're talking about. I'm happy to share more, and I know that there's others that can share more about that particular thing. You can join our table to hear more of that later. But, what I think is important, that people recognize today is that we can and should find ways to help lift this burden of research, right? So it's kind of a theme that I think is going to be, kind of recursive throughout today. And ultimately, help ensure the safety of their employees. The companies need to do that. And I'm looking forward to around that. But I think this goes beyond, just corporate travel. And I think Emma and Christina and Austin have all hinted at this as well, that businesses have the power and the privilege to influence positive change and equitable treatment of their LGBTQ employees. And so despite, 83% of Americans favoring laws to protect LGBT people from discrimination, it's still legal in many states to deny queer folks basic services, things like housing and medical treatment, things that can be very important, relevant factors for travelers. And while we've made progress with the Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage and Title VII, which protects LGBTQ employees from workforce discrimination, we still have a long way to go, and especially at that state level. So in red-leaning states like Texas, where I'm mostly proud to call home most of the time, in places like Florida and Tennessee, legislators are pulling out every trick in the book to chip away at what few protections we have, as well as make advancements on making it legal to treat LGBTQ people unfairly, and particularly around trans people, and even more tragically around trans youth. But we have, as a travel industry, we have power. I think we can be corporate advocates and influence positive legislation. For example, I want to point out something that some of you may know, some of you may not know, but most convention centers actually have a free out clause in the case that their city or state passes discriminatory legislation. And this kind of clause came about in kind of the first round that we saw of the ill-fated bathroom bill law, when many businesses and organizations like the NCAA pulled their events in the state of North Carolina, resulting in millions of state revenue loss, and help influencing their decision to then later revoke that law. And I think most of us will agree, people like Emma shouldn't have to worry about someone pointing the finger at her as to whether or not she's using the right restroom when she's even just passing through an airport. So these are all really, really important things for us to kind of stay on top of and consider. And I encourage everyone, to consider tackling this from both ends today. So yes, we need to seek out the tools and the systems to inform LGBTQ travelers. And whether you're a travel manager or a vendor or a technology provider or just a business traveler, I think it's also important that we all advocate for fair and equitable laws for everyone.
Okay, thanks so much, Emily. And before we move on, we have one question specifically to you that I'll go ahead and ask now. Someone wanted to know, when you mentioned feeling unsafe, is there any particular issue that you were encountering that made you feel that way?
I think that there's probably too many that I could share. I think it's just, when you feel noticed, that people are noticing you, and then that's kind of when you get goosebumps, or you just sort of get that spidey sense that, hey, it's not okay to be your authentic self right now. And I think, I can't remember if it was Christina or Austin who had mentioned, this idea of the definition of covering, right? And you are taking a part of your identity and choosing and sort of the mental burden that goes with that. So, we could have been walking into a restaurant, we could have been checking into a hotel, we could have been holding hands in an airport. And I think all of those are really, sort of tiny micro examples, but those begin to add up.
Absolutely. Thanks, Emily. And as LGBTQ plus travelers, we become accustomed to these things because there are things we encounter every day. So we might notice things that other people might not. So thanks so much for sharing that. All right, for our final panelist, one more Texan for you out of the group. We have Grant Kaplan, who is also joining us from the Houston area. Grant, I turn the stage over to you. You're muted, Grant. You have to. There you go.
Thanks.
You're on now. Yes.
Mute myself and I guess I echo Emily's thoughts. I'm really impressed by the panel you put together. So thanks very much for doing this. Similar to Emily, I spent 7 years on the Equality Texas board also. And it's an excellent, excellent group. And every state has an equivalent organization. The Equality Foundation is the overall USA-wide organization. But there's Equality Minnesota, and I think in New York, they call it New York State Pride Agenda or something like that. And in Massachusetts, they have a little, but
Most every other state is Equality Oklahoma, Equality Florida.
so if you're in a state and you want to, all politics is local. It starts at the local level. So if you want to get involved, I really highly encourage you to get in touch with those organizations in the state where you live or a state that you support. And in Texas, we have a thing called Equality is Good for Business. That was part of Equality Texas for a long time. I think it still is, right, Emily? So she's nodding her head. That's good.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you are with a business that wants to show support for Texas and probably for the other states too, look up that type of effort, and you can actually become part of that effort. So I've been a global business traveler for many, many years, and as our firm Procuragents is consultants, independent consultants, we don't get paid by suppliers, but we give a lot of advice on corporate travel programs and so on. And in doing that, I have to go visit with my clients. I have to meetings with our clients, potential suppliers or current suppliers. And so I get around the world quite a bit. I'm even going to it for a second time to a conference, a second time in 3 months, to a conference in Istanbul where I'm being asked to speak. And they do actually want me to hit a little bit of DEI talk in Turkey. So it's a little bit of a surprise, especially when, if you look at, Emily was talking about GeoShore. This is my screen of GeoShore for Istanbul. You can see the scores of the different neighborhoods, and you can even get a detail of a neighborhood. I don't work for these people, so I don't get anything out of this. I think it's kind of cool that you can see the different types of grades that they get for the different types of threats that could be against you as a traveler. And it includes women's safety, which is sometimes different than LGBTQ. Very good tool. And it's connected to several booking tools, or you can get it on your own for your for your travelers and so on. So the challenges we've seen, even to add to what all these folks have said on this panel, is sometimes you get identified right at the border with your meds. So if you are HIV positive, which too many people unfortunately are, but people that have HIV are living lives where you wouldn't notice that they have it, which is a very good thing. It's living with it in the best way. And when you show up at a certain border, some of those countries that were in brown that Michael showed, they might see your meds and say, "Oh, gay," or straight. So,
Or trans people, everybody could have HIV.
So it doesn't, but they think it does. So we have had stories of travelers having their meds taken away from them by the Customs and Border Patrol at certain countries. So what we've started to do that I think is interesting for a lot of, I looked at the attendee list, and there's a lot of travel buyers and some excellent suppliers here. We need to get better for our community. And although we can't call people out and say, "Hey, tell me if you're gay, tell me if you're bisexual,"
you can't ask that, but just allow people to self-select,
or just offer information up to people going to those countries. And you can through your security provider, you can have a list of countries that your company wants to make sure travelers, the destination of those countries, are getting relevant information. So the quality control system at your travel agency, if you have one that's more customized, not a software as a service agency, they generally don't use quality control in the same way. But if you have a customized travel program, you can set in tests where the destination of a traveler's reservation will be looked at by the quality control. It will see that it's on a certain list, and it will either fire off the information from the security company, notify the security company, even if you're already sending all reservations to a security company. This is another stopgap measure to make sure that travelers are offered information when they may be in jeopardy, and you know it or you don't know it. So working with those challenges is really important. Offering tools like GeoShore, and there's probably some others also that you could offer. That's important to do, and it's not expensive in the scheme of things, because if somebody gets their meds taken away and didn't know that they were really going to a place and they get taken to hospital or something, the cost of that, I mean, firstly, much more important is the personal component, but secondarily, the cost of that is much higher than having given them a tool to avoid trouble. So I really believe in offering solutions to our clients that will help them discover how to help people proactively instead of reactively. And all the security companies I've found are very good with it. It doesn't matter which one you choose. They're all quite excellent at helping to identify issues that could befall LGBTQ+ travelers. And there are certain destinations that you just want to, based on your list, maybe offer people a second choice of taking the trip. And you have to work policy-wise with your HR department to make sure that HR is ready to handle those situations. And if somebody says, I don't feel safe going on this trip, firstly, as travel buyers, shouldn't it be automatic to us to say, let me have a chat with your supervisor, let's get you out of this trip? But we have to have HR really, and policies within the company that say travelers that don't feel safe going somewhere don't have to go, because protecting our staff is part of their well-being, which we are responsible for when they're on the road. The company is responsible for you when you don't take your passport and you cross from Israel into Saudi Arabia or something like that, and then you're in danger. The company has to know those things and has to protect you on company travel. And then you have the issue of maybe being LGBTQ and not having your passport. And I've seen it happen. So these are real things. And it's caused trouble that's just not worth it. From a personal perspective for your traveler,
and as well as talent acquisition and talent retention
is a big deal these days. So having traveler-friendly policies for people who you know are going to travel, that's important. And a lot of people that know they're going to travel a lot ask to see the travel policy before they travel. So that's one of those things where you can point out how friendly you are to all your travelers. Doesn't matter if they're LGBTQ+ or not, but that sure does help to call those things out and to say, we look after people that the rest of the world won't look after on their own, even though they should. So another thing that I find really exciting for those of you here who are members of GBTA, and Michael, can you get that graphic up? I was lucky.
I unfortunately don't have it loaded, Grant. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. And I can't do it by sharing my screen because I don't have it ready. But even I saw one of our members, Rick Louie, is in the attendee group today, and there might be some others. But I was appointed chairman of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, a brand new committee from GBTA that is the first ever globally curated committee for GBTA. So we have members from South Africa, members from Latin America. We have members from, I think we expect somebody from mainland Europe now, but we have a lot in UK, Canada, US. I'm hoping for more. But we have a really high-powered group of DEI qualified individuals, and we are working on LGBTQ+ issues. I actually am the person from the chairman group of the committee that gets to work on that subcommittee. But we have accessibility committee, race and culture committee, gender balance committee, and so on. So this is a very exciting development in our industry because our industry associations have done some things about it, absolutely. But now, instead of the talking about it, we're actually getting to the doing. And that's what really counts. And then you're
LGBTQ friendly
travel policy. It's not
do it. And the doing
maybe what's really great for all of us on this call us into professional development and allow us more access to working with HR, working with legal, working with security and risk, working with finance, and it's good for all of us. And then they all get to understand the issues that we deal with as travel buyers. So I think my time is up, right, Michael?
If you're finished, we're
I can add more things because I have more.
all right.
I don't want to overkill here.
All right. Well, we have about 10 minutes left, and we have a lot of questions
Let's
we're
just go to
hoping to
Q&A.
get to. So let's jump to Q&A, and maybe we'll hit some more of your points with the Q&A. So I want to start with a question from the audience that's gotten a lot of votes, and this kind of ties into kind of where you were going in terms of policy, and they want to know if as a travel manager, you know, if there was one thing in their travel programs that any of the panelists have thoughts on that?
I do, but y'all can go first.
Hey, Grant?
And
Oh.
I do run travel programs for smaller companies that don't have an internal travel buyer, so I do get to work with this myself. We have really wanted to change and have done it, in several companies that we've worked with. Some advising, some of the program, and that has been the issue of personal safety in the policy. Getting it in the policy, letting people know this is a real thing. It's not just a talk. We have also wanted to get legal more involved, and we've had real challenges with that in some companies, so that legal is backing us up and that the message will come from other places and the travel buyer. So we've had some frustration at some companies where the message couldn't come from some of the places it would be more meaningful from than from us. Does that answer the question, you think?
Yes, thank you, Grant. Anyone else have thoughts on that? Our next session is going to be specifically about policy, so we'll be getting a lot more detailed into that with the next set of panelists, but wanted to give everyone a chance to weigh in since this is something that affects you directly.
And for me,
Emma, I think
it's Emma. Yes, it's me. Just so quickly, I think just even saying your policy is LGBTQ plus friendly and making a statement about it, I think is a really good first step, because I've often seen travel policies that don't even say that. And so, as I'm a business traveler, just the fact that you're talking about LGBT plus inclusion, I think, is really helpful. Also, I think for me as a traveler, having the opportunity on my travel profile to say I'm LGBTQ plus is really helpful for you and for me. So, you know, because then ultimately, you know, having information sent to me about LGBTQ plus issues and safety is really important. So those two things would be my ask.
And that deals with self-selection too. And some people will not self-select. It's a real challenge that we've come upon in doing this stuff.
Grant, by self-selection, you mean by on profiles, or?
They won't be open about it. So to Emma's point, it's absolutely right to offer those checkboxes on profiles, and then to use that information from the travel reservation to help that traveler maybe a little differently because of relevant issues. But a lot of people will not self-select, and especially there's been trouble with bisexual people being out of closet about that. So you can't. It's been easier for gay people to talk about it somehow than bisexual people. So they tend to be invisible, which is not a good thing. We want them to be visible.
Thanks, Ray. And we did have a question specifically to that. So someone, a buyer, had said that they had considered adding the profiles, but were concerned about it. But they said it sounds like it's something that would be helpful, you know, to be able to identify who might need, you know, specific research in certain locations. Austin and Christina, is that something that either of you have ever had to put into a profile or have had the option to put into a profile? And would you like to if that was available?
It's not an option in my current profile for when I'm scheduling business travel, because I travel so much. The vendors, my plane carrier and my hotel carrier that I always go with, one of them particularly does ask, and I don't mind because I know that they internally are always training and working. So I guess I trust, for me being in a southern state, that when I walk into that hotel chain, by them knowing that about me, they're not going to question me on the bed, or they're going to, you know, just take that into consideration if an hour later that, you know, I'm dealing with a luggage carrier and holding hands with my wife, and they hear a discriminatory comment, that they can put that to an end and deal with it, you know, with ease, as, you know, things like I'd be open to, but it probably wouldn't be something that'd be as open to as other people on this call. But then again, I travel to a lot of, you know, red states. So I'm just a little gun shy with some past experiences. And the only other thing I just wanted to touch on briefly, I know we're running out of time here, is before financial services, I actually started out in HR. So I certainly agree that it needs to start at the top in HR policy and all that. But the biggest difference I've seen in my company in the last 18 months has been this monthly conversation that we in management, and I'm an individual contributor, but my direct leader now once a month in our calls, and I'm the only LGBTQ member on my team, and we have some other diverse team members, but not in this category. But there's always something to either to know each other better, like the origin of your name, or you know, something that made you feel unsafe while traveling, so that everyone gets to share and it brings teams together. I guess what I'm saying is, you know, making it more human and having my direct leaders start bringing up challenging subjects has made me more open to sharing my experiences, more than it being, I mean, a policy. The policies, of course, made me be open at work, but trusting to go to my leader or trusting to go to my hotel vendor and saying, I just experienced a problem, usually comes by demeanor and conveying a level of understanding, which I guess means, in my opinion, start talking about it more, which I'm starting to see, and that's exciting.
Thank you, Austin. All right, Emma, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that there are some places that you are not comfortable traveling and would refuse to go. Have you felt supported in your corporate roles in that policy? Do you feel like you wouldn't be punished if you said, I don't want to go to this place? Do you feel that you were supported in that?
I think that's a really good question. I think in some people I've worked for, the answer would be no. For my current employer, I think the answer would be yes. And some of that is around the signals and signs and the conversation for LGBT plus inclusion that the organization has. So not only as a trans woman, I want to be safe in my workplace, but I also want to be safe when I'm traveling. So I think for me, it's, you know, it would depend. But ultimately, it's that conversation. I think that I'm a huge believer in the power of conversation, and feeling as if I can be me at work, and therefore having that open conversation with my manager around travel and what it means. Weirdly, many years ago, I was offered a promotion to a US red state, and I turned it down. And I turned it down because I said, why should I reduce my legal support? And it actually turned out to be a very good conversation with my line manager, who didn't know what they'd been asking. So sometimes it's just that power of conversation.
Thank you, Emma. And Christina, what about your experience? Have you felt that you had the option to turn things down if you wanted to, or did you feel supported in that way?
Yeah, it was actually one of my engineering firms that I worked at. I was offered an opportunity to work in Saudi Arabia, and I turned down the opportunity. So, and they were understanding, and they were okay with that.
Right, because it's a fine line, because you you want to feel protected, but you also don't want to feel like you're being denied opportunities that other people are getting just because you're LGBTQ plus. So
for me. Yeah, it was a tricky thing for me. I love to travel and I love to see the world, and this would have been a great opportunity to do it. And I thought by saying no, I closed that door forever. But 2 weeks later, I got an opportunity to go to Australia. So I mean, it didn't close the door; it opened the door to another opportunity. So.
Right, that's great. Well, we're almost out of time. I wanted to close with one question that I know comes up a lot. And Christina, you gave a great example of what you thought was allyship in your travels. And I know a lot of people in the audience are interested in knowing how to be better allies. So just we can quickly kind of go one by one, just maybe 30 seconds to 45 seconds each of kind of what do you think is an example of good allyship. Austin, we can start with you.
Sure, absolutely. Listening.
Listening. Okay, thank you. Emily, what about you?
I think it's an extension of what was shared is empathy for the travelers, that just for the things that you take for granted, and not having to think about when you travel. It's being more aware of what others are having to consider and empathizing with that.
Okay, thank you. Emma?
I'm a grammar geek, so allyship is a verb. It's a doing word. You have to do something. You can't be passive. So learning, understanding, listening, and then making some change and doing something about it.
Oh, I'm sorry, Emma, I didn't mean to take that well. Grant, we'll give you the last word.
Everybody said it so well, it's difficult to add anything, but I think the only thing I might possibly add to that would be planning, and not that it goes along with the changing. You have to and you have to take off the smaller things first, and then spend a little more time
for the bigger thing.
So don't lose sight of it. Don't think you've just finished it. It because the issues change.
All right, thank you, Grant. And thank you to all the panelists. I really appreciate you all sharing your experiences today. I think you've done a great job in setting up the conversation we're going to have in the two subsequent panels. So thank you so much for sharing a part of yourselves with us today. And now I will turn the program back over to David to talk about how we can apply all of this to travel policy.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Yes, I want to add my thanks for sharing your personal stories and providing such valuable insight, Christina and Austin, Emily, Emma, Grant, and Michael. Thanks so much.